Hey guys, really quick, just before we get into the video, I wanted to give you a quick little reminder about the scythe masks that are still on sale on my website, lindevil.com. They're all handmade by me right here. They're 100% cotton, available in 3 different sizes, and I just know you will absolutely love them. So go down to the links below and check them out. Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today, we're doing something super fun. We're making a pattern from 1971. My parents came over a few weeks ago and they brought me a ton of old vintage sewing patterns that had been stored at their house. And I found this one. It has this really cute little dress with bell sleeves, sort of an A-line, darts in the front and back. And I thought that was a very, very cool and sort of just like a cute base for a dress. So I decided that I wanted to make it, but I wanted to make it a little bit more funky. So instead of just using leftover fabrics that I had at home, I went to the thrift store and I got a bunch of men's extra large shirts. I got this ochre and navy one to go together, and I got this red and then sort of like black, white, and tan plaid to go together. So I'm gonna make 2 different dresses, one of which I'm gonna keep and one of which I'm gonna put on the site. For the sleeves, I'm gonna be using this black mesh, this mesh that is actually left over from the laundry bags for the site set, and I'm gonna combine the plaid on the body of the dress in some sort of interesting way. Last night when I was thinking about it, I couldn't really come to a conclusion of what I wanted to do, because even though the shirts are extra large, there's gonna have to be a lot of seaming going on to be able to fit all the chunks together, because one shirt on its own isn't even as long as this dress is probably gonna be. So I created a bunch of little thumbnails. I just used some watercolor pencil crayon Sharpies to just sort of lay it out visually and figure out what it was I wanted to do. And what I've decided is to do the center split. I considered adding a collar to the dress, but I thought that would kind of ruin it, and I wanted to keep it true to the original design. So I'm not gonna do a collar at all. I'm gonna do the center split, and instead of it going all the way up like this, I'm gonna add a little yoke, which is just gonna kind of go from here up in a 3rd plaid. So there's actually technically gonna be 3 different plaids in this one dress, except one of them is only gonna be used for the yoke on the front and back. Now, just before we get started, let me tell you a little bit about sewing patterns. This sewing pattern here, of course, is a vintage one, but they still sell these to this day. You can go to your local fabric store and you can purchase a pattern from any number of companies and any number of styles. This one, of course, cost $1 back in 71. This sort of equivalent pattern today would probably cost about $12 to $15. Included in this envelope isn't even just the pattern pieces for the dress, it actually includes the pieces for the smock and for these pants as well. And it comes in a few different sizes in this one envelope. So what you would do is you would go inside and all the pieces are printed on this sort of tissue paper, like this. And you would select your size based on the style of lines that you see. One is dash, one is solid right here. And you would cut it down to your size. So the very first step before we get started is actually gonna be to trace out these pattern pieces and grade them up by about 3 inches so that they'll be around a standard size small. Once that's done, we can get into the fun part of course, chopping apart these shirts. So with all that said, let's get started. As I had mentioned, the first step is grading up the pattern. I am starting with the dress front, working from center front around the perimeter of the pattern piece, expanding as I go along. As a side note, I do not recommend using tissue paper pattern pieces to grade with. The sturdier the paper, the better. Next, I am cutting it out and using the edge of the table to uncurl it. Then, I am figuring out how tall I want the yoke to be and marking it on my new pattern piece. I'll then cut along that line and add on my seam allowance as well as some labels. I'll repeat the same process for every piece in the pattern. Now that the pattern is done, I'm moving on to cut apart these shirts. I'm starting with the back as that is the largest piece of fabric. And luckily, I was able to cut one front piece from this chunk without having to add any seams. This red shirt was the only one I was able to do this with. To expose more usable fabric, I removed the buttons and stitch ripped the placket open. For the back piece of the dress, I used 2 large chunks of fabric and placed the seam at the waist. Next, I repeated the same sort of process with the other plaid shirt. This plaid was the busiest out of all of them and also the hardest to match. Lastly, I used this yellow plaid shirt to cut out both my front and back yokes. With all of that plaid finally sorted, I quickly cut out the mesh sleeves. Alright guys, and we are back. So obviously it is a new day. It took a lot longer than expected yesterday to do all of the cutting. The shirts were sort of tricky to work with. I had to salvage as big of chunks of fabric as possible from them. And then of course I wanted all the plaid to be matched. And that's a thing that you always want to do when you're working with plaids or stripes or any other sort of like very obvious pattern, so that when there's a seam placed, it looks as though the pattern just flows on continuously without being interrupted. You've got to really look at the lines in the plaid, which way they're going, and match up both pieces and sew through them sort of as perfectly as possible. It gives that sort of continuous effect. I also tried to place the seams in logical spots. So at the waist, like not really cutting through, you know, like across the bum or anything like that, because that would be very obvious and look sort of like a mistake. Doing all of that for both dresses took quite a lot of time. So I ended up calling it after finishing with the plaid yesterday. And then this morning I came up and I cut out the mesh sleeves. With that, we have all the pieces we need minus the cuffs, which of course they're just little rectangles. So I'm just gonna throw those in really fast at the end. And now we can basically get started with the sewing. Before sewing, I gave each piece a good press to get out all the wrinkles and creases. As a side note again, I recommend that you do this before you actually cut the fabric. Here are all the pieces laid out the way that they will be sewn together. The first step is to serge some of the raw edges, particularly on the inner horizontal seams and then the side seams, center front, and center back. Then I am sewing the front and back darts on all pieces, including the back yokes. Next is to sew the yokes to the corresponding body pieces. Then, of course, pressing open all of those seams so they lay nice and flat. The next step is the back zipper. Unfortunately, my local store didn't have any invisible zippers in the length I needed, so I'm using an exposed zipper instead. To insert the zipper, I'm first stitching the center back seam below it and then pressing back the rest of the seam allowance 5/8 of an inch. From there, I'll pin the zipper into place and stitch very closely all around it using a zipper foot. Once the zipper is done, I'll sew the shoulder seams and then work on the neck facing. A neck facing, or any facing for that matter, is used to make an opening clean finished. That means on the outside of the garment you don't see any stitching. First, I'll turn back the outer edge of the entire facing 1/4 inch, stitching the whole way around, and then I'll sew the facing to the neckline of the dress, right sides together. Next is to clip the curves and understitch. This will keep the facing rolled towards the inside of the garment. To keep everything looking all neat and tidy, I'll give the whole neckline a good press. Also, to keep the facing turned towards the inside of the dress, I'll tack it to the shoulder seam allowance. The very last step of this facing is to turn it back at the center back and sew it down to the zipper tape. Sleeves are up next. I'm going to sew the underarm seam with a single needle first and then serge it. To finish the sleeve hems, I'm going to create an elastic casing by folding the hem back 3/8 of an inch and then another 3/8 of an inch and sew very close to the edge almost the whole way around. I'll leave an opening to insert the elastic with a safety pin. Once the elastic is all the way through, I'll tack it together and then close up the opening in the casing. Next step for the sleeves is to sew them into the armholes right sides together. Once they're sewn into place, I'll finish the edges with the serger. At this point, we are almost done. The very last step is just to press up and sew the hem. Alright you guys, so I just finished sewing up the first dress. I'm really happy with how it came out. I think it looks great. The plaids are really fun, it's really bold and different. And now I'm really quickly gonna go sew up the second dress so that we can come back and do a reveal of both. way I styled the dress was with some Mary Jane type pumps, white socks, and a ponytail. I was going for more of a classic vintage look. The next way I styled it is with fishnet tights, docks, a belt, and a chunky necklace. I wanted to create more of a punk-inspired look here, which works really well with plaid. I absolutely love this outfit. Next up is the first reveal of the second dress that I made. This I kept simple and just paired with some heeled snakeskin boots. Alright you guys, we're back and we're at the end of today's video. I hope that you enjoyed that little styling portion. That's always my favorite thing to film. This video has been one of the hardest things that I've taken on since starting this channel. It ended up taking me about 3 days to get through all of the filming. The first day was spent purely just on sorting out all the plaid. The second day was spent sewing this dress, and the third day today was spent sewing the black dress. Speaking of which, that black dress is for sale for you guys right now on my website. There is of course only one. It is a one-of-a-kind piece. It has a little bit of this plaid on my left side, and the body of it is actually just plain black. One of the shirts, this yellow one here, just didn't end up cooperating. No matter how many times I rearranged it or tried to make it work, I just couldn't get a full dress piece out of it. Mostly because the plaid was directional, so it only worked up and down. If you turned it sideways, it wouldn't line up anymore. So that sort of hindered me in being able to piece it all together. However, I think the black looks really sharp, and I think it'll be really easy to fit into any wardrobe that way. You can style it in so many different ways and wear it to so many different occasions that maybe you wouldn't be able to with this dress, because it is, after all, a little bit funky. Also, let me know in the comments below, what other sewing videos would you like to see? Do you like watching me sew things, or would you like me to do a little bit more tutorial style where I can teach you guys how to sew as well? As always, thank you so much for watching this video, and I'll see you all in the next one.